Welcome to another Real Estate Talk Show, featuring highlights of the best interviews from our national real estate radio show. Here's another property expert.
Had an email from Peter. I won't mention Peter's last name for obvious reasons once I read the email. It says, Kevin, can you comment on sunset clauses in contracts and why they are an agent add-on and not part of the REIQ standard document? I have had a seller try to get out of a contract with severe seller's remorse. I guess this is Peter's opinion. They instigated the sunset clause with a $5,000 offer better than mine with $1,000 down as a deposit. It was obvious to me that it was not a genuine offer. Once again, these are Peter's words, and they just wanted my conditional contract to fall, and then the new contract would also fall over in the 5-day cooling off period. I went unconditional and all is good because I had the funds to get over the conditions and so on and so forth. Peter believes that this is just another way, a form of gazumping. Peter, thank you for your email. Raised a few interesting questions. So I've got Rob Belander from MBA Lawyers on the line. Rob, I know you've read through this email. What do you make of Peter's comments?
Yes, I can see his point and why he sees it that way, Kevin. By the way, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, mate? How's the coffee going?
Oh, this cafe latte set's pretty good.
Good on you, mate.
Yeah, I can understand why he thinks that way, but a bit of education. Agents rarely will suggest such a clause because they work on the little spoken about principle that less is yes. So from an agent's perspective, the less clauses they have on an offer, the more chance they've got of getting a yes from a seller. So it won't be an agent who'll suggest such a clause to you, but if you educate yourself as an investor, it's a really good way to move forward with the deal, where otherwise you've got an impasse. Usually you find a seller reluctant to accept a conditional offer, say, from a buyer because they think, well, a higher offer might be just around the corner, and you've got this buyer that may be unwilling to sort of go up a bit in their price to conclude a deal with the seller, and they themselves need to make their offer, say, subject to selling their own place. So the solution is what we call a sunset clause. Now, Peter's experience highlights the importance of having a well-drafted clause.
Yeah,
the clause I bet he had in his contract was one where the seller could, if they got any offer, just put it to him that he had 4 days to go unconditional. The way these clauses work is the seller will sign your offer to buy, subject to you selling your place, but he'll have this sunset clause which say, if it's properly worded, the clause will say if he gets a better offer, and he has to prove it, he has to produce a copy of the contract and a copy of the trust account receipt for the deposit, and a proper deposit had to be paid, not $1,000 in his case, then he can give you as the seller, say, 4 or 5 working days notice to go unconditional. Then you've got the chance to walk away. You'd have to go and bridge the purchase, bridge finance it if you couldn't sell your property in time, or that's the way it works, basically.
It doesn't even, in my experience, Rob, and you've got far more experience than me, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a better offer in terms of money. It can be better offer in terms of conditions. As an example, if there's a conditional contract on a property and then someone comes in, say, at maybe $5,000 less, but theirs is totally unconditional with a quicker settlement, sometimes the seller can opt to take the offer for a lesser amount.
That's true, and that whole thing is subjective, so you don't want to get yourself into that area as an investor. Your clause, your sunset clause, you should promote to the seller is that if he gets an equal or better offer in terms of price with a shorter or same settlement date with the same deposit or more, then he's got this 4 or 5 days to put it to you that you go unconditional and you get bridging finance. Otherwise, you pull out and he pulls out.
Yeah, this highlights the need to make sure you're talking to a solicitor when you're going through this process.
Bless you, my son, for suggesting people talk to their solicitor, Kevin.
Thought you'd say that. Mate, can I ask you a question about the sunset clause? Do you think it's in favour of either the buyer or the seller?
Oh, now, that's a good question. I think it's a well-balanced clause. People understand that the downside for the seller, the downside for the seller is they can't force this buyer to match the higher offer, and that's the downside for the seller. But they don't understand that there's also a downside for the buyer, and the downside for the buyer is that the existence of this contract out there in the marketplace gives encouragement to and greater confidence to other potential buyers, both of the buyer's property and the seller's property. And what it does in reality, I find, is it pushes buyers to offer more. What this does is in turn place pressure on the buyer from the seller now, the first buyer, to actually achieve a sale of their own property, usually sooner rather than later, and probably for a lesser price than a greater price. So if you think it through and that there's a downside for both buyer and seller, the clause is a genuine clause, and it's a fair compromise between their interests and allows both buyer and seller to get on with the business and move forward in the real estate market.
Yes, Rob, well put. And Peter, I hope that helped you with the answer to your question. Rob, what I'd like to do is just clear up the confusion sometimes between the sunset clause and the backup contract. Can we come back separately, maybe next week, and we'll have a look at the backup contract?
Happy to, Kevin.